Hello, welcome to the course of Organic Agriculture. This is the third part of the first lecture. I want just in the next slide to present you the title of this lecture and the issues we have planned to discuss together. So, the title of this lecture is Introduction to Organic Production. It is the third part, and just for summarizing, I wanted to remind you what we have planned to discuss. So, please follow me in the next slide. As you see, here you have a list of the issues that I have planned to discuss during this lecture. This is the third part, so one part of them we already discussed. Let's jump to the next slide to continue with the lecture. Here in this slide, you have a list of the problems of agriculture of nowadays. This slide you have seen in the previous part of this lecture. It is just to link what we have discussed previously, because now we still continue to speak about the problems of nowadays agriculture. Just again to remind you, we have discussed that the problems of nowadays agriculture are climate change, soil loss, species loss, biodiversity, and environmental pollution, that it is linked then and more, more present for us when we find it in the food chain. In this third part of the first lecture, we will speak about environmental pollution. What is the contribution of agriculture to the environmental pollution, and how this environmental pollution is then transmitted to the food chain. There are different definitions about environmental pollution. I choose one simple to understand what the environmental pollution is. The environmental pollution is the contamination of the physical and biological components of the Earth's atmosphere system to such an extent that normal environmental processes are adversely affected. Which are these physical and biological components? There is soil, air, water, and living organisms. If we focus the soil pollution refers to the presence in the soil of a chemical or a substance out of the place and or present at a higher content than normal concentration that has adverse effect on any non-targeted organism. The definition in this case, according to me, is very clear. We have to focus to the fact that the polluters are the chemical substances that are not normal. They are not found normally in the environment from the natural sources, or there is a substance that normally is, but it can be in higher concentration than normal. Soil pollution can be caused by different causes or can have different causes. It can be, for example, by a specific event, but it can even be it can come from a series of events within a particular area in which contaminants are released to the soil and the source and the identity of the pollution is or can be easily identified, or we can have the other case where the pollution source is not easily identified because it is a diffuse pollution. We'll see what are different pollutions and their classifications in the next slides. Let's speak here about the sources of pollution. There are two main groups of sources of pollution, or we group in two groups. One is, or there are causes that come from human activities or anthropogenic activities, and the other is of natural origin, like geogenic sources. If we speak about anthropogenic activities that are causes of pollution, we can mention agriculture and livestock activities, industry, mining, waste and sewage, domestic pollution, transport, wars. For example, if we speak about transports, we know that transport are using mostly the fuel, the fossil fuel, and this is a very important source of pollution. And the transport of humans can be private or public transport, and the transport of goods again is a very important source of pollution. Wars, from the other side, there is an activity or a cause of pollution that is coming from people, from anthropogenic activities. Wars in their side, just to mention bombs and chemical weapons, and we understand that the wars can be a very important source of pollution. Speaking further about anthropogenic activities that cause the pollution and can be an important point source of pollution, can be in industry, as I mentioned before, the factories or factory sites. Waste and wastewater disposal, in nowadays, with a huge production of the waste, the landfills are a source of pollution, an important source of pollution. From the other side, we use agrochemicals, and especially if we use them in an excessive way, mining and smelting. If we refer to the natural sources of pollution, we can mention here rocks. Different rocks sometimes can have impact, and they are a source of pollution depending on their chemical content. Or volcans. Volcans can be a source of pollution. Fires, cosmic radiation and hydrocarbons, natural asbestos, and other. If we, for example, focus to fires, fires are of natural, but sometimes they are of human origin, anthropogenic origin, especially if we refer to the, at least on the news that we have heard last times, like the excessive fires in huge areas in Siberia and the fires in Brazil. In this case, it is thought and it is mentioned in the news that these sources of pollution, in fact, they are caused by humans, just to have the bare soil to use it for other purposes. Let's speak to distinguish the type of the pollutions. Depend on the how spread is the pollution, and depend on the fact if we know the origin of pollution, we divide the pollution into types: the point pollution and diffuse pollution. What is point pollution and what is diffuse pollution? Point soil pollution can be caused by a specific event or a series of events within a particular area. So it is in a certain area that the limits or the border of it are defined, in which contaminants are released to the soil, and the source and the identity of the pollution is easily identified. From the other side, the diffuse pollution is the contrary, is spread over very wide areas. It is accumulated in the soil and does not have a single or easily identified source. Diffuse pollution occurs where emission, transformation, and dilution of contaminants in other media have occurred prior to their transfer to the soil. What does it mean? That we don't know exactly the place where the pollution has happened in the first time, because then it is diluted or is spread in other ways in bigger areas. Here you have a photo. I'm sorry, it is not a very nice photo, but it's to show you, for example, a case of landfill, and it is a very bad managed landfill. But it is to show that this is a pollution caused by us, by human origin. And these landfills can be then as a source of pollution for further pollution of environment, comprising soil, water, air pollution. Here in this photo, you have again an example of the pollution. This is a point pollution because the source is well defined and the area has its borders. I'm sorry that it is not a very nice photo, but at the end it is a pollution. It is caused from our activity, from our everyday work and activities that from one side gives to us benefits, but from the other side they have bad effects in their environment. Let's go to the next slide. Let's speak a little more about diffuse pollution. Just to continue with the idea that we started before. And I wanted to remind you that diffuse pollution involves the transport of pollutants via air, soil, water systems. So these systems exchange with each other. But how can we find an example? For example, many contaminants, including major and macronutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus, and we know that we use them in agriculture, are transported. They are transported in the system soil, surface water, and then goes to the groundwater. And why we are so concerned about them? What then happened? Let's see a little more in details. For example, the leaching of nitrogen especially causes in the waters the process or the phenomena that is called eutrophication. The nitrogen that comes in the waters, in the lakes, in the rivers, but especially in the lakes, in the water that don't move, it brings there a lot of nitrogen that was used, for example, from or with the fertilizers. And these nitrogens create the conditions that a lot of algae can grow there because they find a lot of food for them. And this expansion of the algae, development of the algae, then create a problem with other organisms because they consume their oxygen that is in the water. And the first organism of the water that we think about, they are fish, but not only them. The other problem or the other harm that comes from the pollution, from the diffuse pollution, is the harm that is caused to the soil microorganisms and large soil dwelling organisms. So the fertilizers that you use in the soil and the pesticides create the problems with the microorganisms and other organisms that are present in the soil. From the other side, they are very important for soil biodiversity, but even in the biodiversity in general, and the services that these biodiversity and organisms offer to the systems and to ecosystems. And just as a conclusion, then we have human health issues that comes from their consuming due to polluted drinking water too, because the nutrients that we use in the agriculture soils moves through the water runoffs or directly to groundwater through infiltration, and then can be in contact with drinking water. And in this case, we have pollution of drinking water that can cause human problems. In this image, try to see it carefully. I'm trying to give a better view now, what we have mentioned before, considering the fact that the systems communicate with each other, and if we pollute one system, then it will be transmitted to the other system. So, just to have an example. In the case of, for example, agrochemicals that you have here on the left, the agrochemicals will pollute the soil, but from the other side, they can pollute the atmosphere. And if we see the long line, then it will go to pollute the waters, the sea and the surface waters. Because you know that then the surface waters that is in the rivers, lakes, can, especially the rivers, can communicate with the sea. And I'm leaving some seconds to see all the interactions and then we'll pass to the next slide. Okay? Let's pass to the next slide of this lecture. If you see here in this slide, based on the World Soil Resources Report, there are identified soil pollution as one of the main soil threats affecting global soils and the ecosystem services provided by them. Again, based on scientific evidence, soil pollution can severely degrade the major ecosystem services provided by soil. It reduces food security by both. So in two ways. First, reducing crop yield due to toxic levels of contaminants, and then, as a next cause, is causing crops produced from polluted soils to be unsafe for consumption. This is true for humans and animals. Now let's focus to this image that is in this slide. I have tried to bring to you in a very simplified way how the different systems communicate between them and how one of them can pollute the other. In the middle of the picture, you see the signs of pesticide storage. This pesticide storage can pollute the environment. First, can happen accidents that make possible then the spills of the pesticides go to the soil. And these pesticides that are put in the soil, then through water that comes from the rainfall or irrigation, through infiltration go to the groundwater table. Another way how this pesticide storage can pollute is pollution of the air. Just only evaporation of these pesticides brings the pesticides in the air, and then by the wind they can be spread in the atmosphere. Then a part of the pesticides can go directly to the surface water through the runoffs. So the pesticides goes with water that moves in the surface and arrive, as I said, to the surface water, in the lakes, in the rivers, in reservoirs, etc. Even in the wells that we can use for agriculture, but there are countries that still use the water that comes from the wells. In the picture you see a person that is spraying. This is a normal activity that happens in the agriculture, that we or the people spread the pesticides for plant protection. Then a part of this will be spread in the air, in the atmosphere, and in this case we have a diffuse pollution in the atmosphere. A part of it will go to the plants and one part of it will go to the topsoil. Especially the part that go to the topsoil, then with irrigation or with raining will arrive through infiltration to the groundwater table. And the groundwater table will be polluted. Usually the groundwater table communicates with other surface water reservoirs or lakes or rivers. So again, one part of the pollution will not stay in the soil, but will go again to the surface water. So we can understand now better that how our activities, just to mention only the use of pesticides in agriculture, how it affects the environment, different environments, and it not remains a point pollution, but it is transformed in a diffuse pollution.